The crystal chandelier above the ballroom of the Somerset estate didn't just illuminate the room. It weaponized the light, refracting it off 1,000 diamonds until the air itself felt expensive and suffocating. Elara Vance felt the weight of the silence before she heard the words. It was the kind of silence that happens when a predator finally corners its prey in front of a captive audience. She stood at the epicenter of the marble floor, her gown a liquid shimmer of midnight silk that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. Opposite her, his face flushed with the arrogance of a man who had never been told no, stood Julian Sterling. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne like a scepter, his eyes narrowed with a cold, jagged disdain. "Let's stop the charade, shall we?" Julian's voice didn't just carry, it commanded. The orchestra's violins faltered, the musicians sensing the shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. "We all know why you're here, draped in fabric you couldn't possibly afford on a teacher's salary. You've been circling the perimeter of this gala like a shark in shallow water, looking for the biggest wallet to sink your teeth into." A collective gasp rippled through the circle of dukes, tech moguls and inheritance-bloated socialites. The air grew thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the metallic tang of social blood in the water. "You're nothing but a common fortune hunter, Elara," Julian sneered, stepping closer until he was mere inches from her face. "A beautiful leech looking for a host. Tell me, did you pick my family tonight because you liked the legacy, or was it just the sheer number of zeros in our portfolio?" The humiliation should have been absolute. A woman of lesser resolve would have fled the room in tears, or perhaps lashed out with a frantic, stuttering defense. But Elara Vance didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Instead, she did something that chilled the marrow in Julian's bones. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of submission, nor was it a mask for pain. It was the slow, terrifyingly serene curve of a grandmaster watching a novice walk directly into a trap they'd spent years setting. It was a smile that contained secrets older than the Sterling family fortune. "Is that all, Julian?" she asked softly. Her voice was a low velvet contrast to his jagged bark. "Before we dive deeper into the shadows of this ballroom and uncover the truth that Elara is hiding behind that haunting smile, I want to say hello to all of you incredible souls tuning in. I am so grateful to have you here in our storytelling circle. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. How are you doing today? I truly hope you're feeling inspired. If you haven't already joined our family, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single second of what happens next, because the game Elara is playing is far more dangerous than anyone in this room can imagine. Julian's grip tightened on his glass. He had expected a scene, a frantic denial, something he could crush. This calm, this knowing look in her eyes made his skin crawl. "You think this is a game?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, lethal vibration. "I could have you escorted out of here by the wrists in 5 minutes. I could blackball your name from every reputable circle in this city before the sun rises." Elara tilted her head, a stray lock of dark hair falling over a shoulder that bore a faint, jagged scar. A detail hidden from the casual observer, but a mark of a past Julian couldn't begin to comprehend. "You could certainly try," she whispered. "But before you call for security, you might want to ask yourself why the Somerset family, the very hosts of this exclusive evening, left the master keys to the gallery in my clutch tonight." She didn't wait for his response. She turned, the train of her dress snapping like a whip against the polished floor, and glided toward the shadows of the west wing. Julian stood frozen, the blood slowly draining from his face. Around him, the whispers began to swell like a rising tide. The predator suddenly felt like the one being hunted. Who was this woman? Why did she look at his family's crown jewels with the eyes of a debt collector? And more importantly, what was in that gallery that she seemed to own with a single devastating look? The mystery was no longer about whether Elara belonged in the room. It was about whether the room and everyone in it belonged to her. As she disappeared behind the heavy oak doors of the private wing, the question hung in the air like a guillotine. The heavy oak doors of the west wing clicked shut behind Elara, muffling the frantic energy of the ballroom. In the sudden silence, she let her smile drop. It didn't crumble into sadness. It sharpened into a cold, clinical focus. Elara Vance was not a woman governed by whimsy or luck. Every breath she took was calculated, a byproduct of a childhood spent learning that the world didn't give you what you deserved. It gave you what you were strong enough to take. Alara's deepest desire wasn't the gold or the titles dripping off the guests outside. It was reclamation. To the world, she was a quiet academic, a woman who spent her days in dusty archives. But in her soul, she was the last guardian of a legacy the Sterlings had spent 30 years trying to erase. Her fear? Not Julian's threats, but the possibility of failing the man who had died in disgrace so she could live in the shadows. She reached into her small, beaded clutch, her fingers brushing against a cold piece of iron. It wasn't a master key as she had hinted to Julian. It was a signet ring, worn smooth by time, bearing an emblem that predated the Sterlings' new money empire by 2 centuries. "You're late, Alara." The voice came from the darkest corner of the gallery. Standing by a floor-to-ceiling window was Silas Thorne. He was a man built of sharp angles and even sharper secrets, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Silas was Alara's only true ally, a disgraced former investigator who had been cast out of the high society circles for digging too deep into the Sterlings' founding myths. "I had to make an entrance, Silas," Alara replied, her voice steady. "Julian Sterling is exactly the arrogant pup his father was. He fell for the bait within 10 minutes. He didn't just fall for it, he broadcasted it," Silas said, stepping into the moonlight. His eyes, weary but piercing, scanned her face. "But you're playing with fire. If they realize you're the daughter of Arthur Vance before we get into the vault, this building becomes a tomb. You know what they do to people who threaten the Sterling narrative." "I'm not a child anymore, Silas. I've lived with the weight of that name for 20 years. I can carry it for one more night." Alara's motivation was simple. The Somerset Gala wasn't just a party. It was an auction. Behind a hidden panel in this very wing lay the Viridian Ledger, the original accounting book that proved Julian's grandfather hadn't built his fortune. He had stolen it from Alara's father, framing him for a massive embezzlement scheme that ended in a prison cell and a broken heart. The stakes were higher than just money. Alara's mother was still alive, living in a modest care facility, her mind slipping away. She still called out for Arthur in the middle of the night, asking why the neighbors were throwing stones at their windows. Alara needed the ledger to clear her father's name while her mother could still understand what justice meant. "The guests are starting to wonder about the fortune hunter," Silas warned, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You've piqued their curiosity. Half the men out there want to marry you and the other half want to audit you." "Let them wonder," Alara said, her gaze fixed on a portrait at the end of the hall, a painting of the Sterling patriarch. "The more they look at me, the less they look at what's happening beneath their feet." As Alara spoke, she remembered the nights she spent as a girl, watching her father pore over blueprints and ledgers, his hands shaking with the effort of keeping their world together. She remembered the day that official men came, the way they tore the house apart, and the way the Sterling family stood on their front lawn, watching the destruction with clinical indifference. The door to the gallery creaked open. A young woman slipped inside, her face pale. This was Lydia Sterling, Julian's younger sister. Unlike her brother, Lydia wore her wealth like a shroud. She looked terrified. "I saw you," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw the way you looked at my brother. You didn't just smile because he was being a bore. You smiled because you know." Alara didn't move. She felt Silas tense beside her, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. "Know what, Lydia?" Alara asked, her tone shifting to something maternal, something dangerously soft. "I've seen the papers in my father's study," Lydia said, stepping closer, her eyes darting toward the door. "The name Vance. I thought everyone with that name was gone. If Julian finds out who you are, he won't just throw you out. He'll destroy you." "Then why are you telling me this?" Alara asked. "Because," Lydia whispered, "I think my father killed your father. And I don't want to be a Sterling anymore." The revelation hung in the air, a jagged piece of glass. Alara looked at the girl, the daughter of her enemy, and saw a reflection of her own trapped youth. This was the first crack in the Sterling's polished exterior. Alara stepped toward Lydia, her hand reaching out not to strike but to steady the girl's shaking shoulder. "The truth is a heavy thing to carry alone, Lydia. But if you're going to stand with me, you need to understand one thing." Alara leaned in, her eyes flashing with a fire that had been smoldering for 2 decades. "I didn't come here to be a Sterling. I came here to end them." The air in the gallery grew thin, charged with the electricity of Lydia's confession. Ilara maintained her grip on the girl's shoulder, her mind racing. Was Lydia a genuine whistleblower or a Trojan horse sent to extract a confession? Silas remained in the periphery, a shadow with eyes, his silence a warning. If you want to end them, Lydia stammered, her gaze fixed on Ilara's signet ring, you need to move now. My father is announcing the merger with the Global Heritage Fund in 20 minutes. Once those papers are signed, the sterling assets are liquidated into a private trust. The ledger won't matter anymore because the paper trail will be buried under a mountain of international red tape. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The merger. It was the final move in a 30-year heist. Where is the panel, Lydia? Ilara demanded, her voice losing its velvet softness and turning into tempered steel. Behind the portrait of the founding board, Lydia whispered, pointing toward the end of the hall. But it's biometric. It requires my father's thumbprint and a 6-digit code that changes every hour. I don't need his thumbprint, Ilara said, reaching into her clutch and pulling out a small translucent silicone sheet. I just need the glass he was holding 10 minutes ago. Silas moved then, his movements fluid and practiced. I'll get the print. Ilara, you get to the panel. If Julian sees me, I'm dead weight, but he's still looking for you. You're the distraction. Wait. Lydia grabbed Ilara's arm. Julian, he's not just arrogant. He's dangerous. He's been obsessed with finding the Vance girl for months. He didn't call you a fortune hunter because he was offended. He did it to see if you would flinch. He suspects. The revelation hit Ilara like a physical blow. The fortune hunter comment hadn't been an insult. It was a probe. Julian wasn't a bumbling heir, he was a sentry. Then we changed the plan, Ilara said. Silas, get the print. Lydia, get back to the ballroom. If you're missed, they'll come looking for you. I'll lead Julian away from the gallery. Just as Lydia turned to leave, the heavy oak doors groaned on their hinges. The sound of rhythmic polished leather against marble echoed through the hall. Julian Sterling didn't enter the room, he invaded it. He wasn't alone. 2 large men in ill-fitting suits, security masquerading as guests, stood flanking him. I thought I might find my sister giving away the family secrets, Julian said, his voice dripping with a terrifying, calm malice. He didn't look at Lydia, his eyes were locked on Ilara. And the fortune hunter is still here. Tell me, Ilara, or should I call you Miss Vance? Did you think a midnight blue dress and a fake smile would be enough to hide the stench of poverty and desperation? Lydia let out a small, choked sob. Julian, please. Go to your room, Lydia, Julian snapped, his eyes never wavering from Ilara. We'll discuss your treason later. As Lydia scrambled past him, Julian stepped further into the gallery. Silas was gone, melted into the shadows behind a velvet curtain, but Ilara stood her ground. She was alone in the light, facing the man who represented everything that had destroyed her family. You're quite the investigator, Julian, Ilara said, her voice echoing in the vast space. But you're wrong about one thing. I'm not desperate. I'm a creditor. And I've come to collect. Julian laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Collect? From me? You're in my house, surrounded by my men, in a city where my father owns the police and the press. You have nothing but a name that belongs in a graveyard. He signaled to the men. Check her bag. I want to see exactly what keys she thinks she has. The larger of the 2 men lunged forward. This was the moment. The inciting incident that shattered the Cold War of the ballroom and turned it into a physical struggle for survival. Ilara didn't wait for him to reach her. She grabbed a heavy bronze bust of a Roman orator from a nearby pedestal and hurled it with a strength born of 20 years of repressed rage. The bust caught the guard in the chest, sending him staggering back. Run, Ilara. Silas's voice boomed from the shadows as he stepped out, tackling the second guard. Ilara didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the portrait of the founding board. The fuse was lit. She could hear the shouts behind her, the sound of glass breaking and Julian's roar of fury. She reached the portrait, her fingers frantically searching for the hidden catch Lydia had described. She found it, a small recessed lever behind the gilded frame. She pulled. The massive painting swung outward, revealing a sleek, modern keypad and a glass scanning plate. 20 minutes until the merger. Behind her, she heard the sickening thud of a fist hitting flesh. She turned to see Silas pinned against a display case, Julian looming over him with a silver-handled cane. The code, Ilara. Julian shouted, his face contorted. "Give me the ring you're wearing or I'll make sure your friend never walks again." The stakes had shifted. It wasn't just about the ledger anymore. It was about the lives of the only people she had left. Alara looked at the keypad, then at Silas, then at the man who thought he had already won. Alara's hand hovered over the keypad. She didn't know the code. She didn't have the print yet. But she did have one thing Julian didn't expect. He had the truth. "You want the ring, Julian?" Alara asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer force of her resolve. "Come and take it." As Julian stepped toward her, leaving Silas slumped on the floor, the lights in the gallery suddenly flickered and died. A secondary alarm began to wail, not a security alarm but a fire alert. The room plunged into chaos. The smoke began to pour from the vents, Silas's backup plan. In the confusion, Alara felt a hand grab her wrist. "Move," a voice whispered. It wasn't Silas. It was Lydia. The game had officially moved from the shadows into the flames. The gallery was a symphony of chaos. The wail of the fire alarm cut through the air like a serrated blade, and the artificial fog, Silas's specialized smoke, billowed thick and white, smelling of sulfur and ozone. Alara allowed Lydia to pull her through the haze, their heels clicking frantically against the marble. Behind them, Julian's voice was a jagged silhouette of rage, screaming for the guards to seal the exits. "This way," Lydia hissed, shoving Alara into a narrow servants' passage hidden behind a velvet tapestry. The passage was cramped, smelling of floor wax and old stone. Alara's lungs burned. "Where's Silas? I can't leave him." "He knows the house better than you think," Lydia gasped, her silk gown snagging on a rough-hewn beam. "He's the one who triggered the suppression system. If we stay, Julian will kill us both. He's past the point of caring about optics." They emerged into a small circular room, the clock tower. The massive gears of the estate's timepiece groaned above them, a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat. Through the narrow slats of the windows, Alara could see the grounds below. The grand ball was hemorrhaging guests. The elite were fleeing the fire, their expensive cars clogging the driveway like panicked beetles. But Julian wasn't fleeing. Alara saw him emerge onto the terrace below, his tuxedo disheveled, barking orders into a radio. He wasn't looking at the smoke. He was looking at the tower. "He knows we're here," Alara whispered. "He knows I know the way," Lydia corrected, her eyes wide with terror. "Alara, the ledger. It's not just an accounting book. There's a second part. A digital key hidden in the spine. Without it, the merger can happen but they can never access the offshore accounts. That's why he's so desperate. He needs that key to pay off the Heritage Fund's entry fee." Alara looked at the signet ring on her finger. The heavy iron felt like it was vibrating. "The ring. My father always told me to keep it close. He said it was the only thing the Sterlings couldn't buy." Suddenly, the door at the base of the tower splintered. The guards were coming. "We have to go up," Alara said, pointing to the rusted iron ladder leading toward the clock's inner workings. As they climbed, the tension shifted from physical to psychological. Every rung was a struggle. Lydia's breath hitched in her throat, a sob of pure exhaustion. Alara reached down, grabbing the younger girl's hand. "Don't look down, Lydia. Look at me. We are finishing this." They reached a narrow catwalk directly behind the massive glass face of the clock. The moon hung outside, a silver coin illuminating the Roman numerals. Alara could see the silhouette of the entire estate. The greed, the lies, the blood that watered the gardens. "You're not like them," Alara said, her voice softening as they huddled in the shadows of the gears. "Why are you helping me?" "Truly." Lydia leaned her head against the cold glass. "My father. He didn't just ruin yours. He ruined my mother. She found out about the Vance embezzlement, the real one, 10 years ago. She tried to go to the police. 2 days later she fell from this very tower. They called it a tragic accident. Julian was only 18 but he helped clean the scene. I saw him, Alara. I saw him holding her scarf. The weight of the tragedy bonded them in a way no plan ever could. This wasn't just a heist or a legal battle. It was a ghost story. 2 daughters both haunted by the same monsters. A shadow fell across the catwalk. Julian hadn't used the ladder. He had come up the service elevator on the exterior. He stood at the edge of the platform, a small black handgun leveled at Alara's chest. The fire alarm had cut out, replaced by the deafening silence of the heights. "Enough," Julian said. His voice was devoid of the earlier rage. It was cold. Final. "The ring, Alara. Throw it to me or I'll see if you can fly better than my mother did." "You killed her," Lydia screamed, her voice cracking. "You and father." Julian didn't even look at his sister. "She was a liability. Just like you're becoming. The Sterling name is more important than any one person. Now Alara, the ring. I won't ask a third time." Alara looked at the gun, then at the massive minute hand of the clock which was inching toward the 12. The merger was minutes away. If she gave him the ring, her father's name would stay in the dirt forever. If she didn't, she and Lydia would die here. But Alara noticed something Julian hadn't. The gears behind him were old and the fire suppression system had slicked the floor with a fine oily mist. "You want the fortune hunter to give up her prize?" Alara asked, stepping forward, her smile returning. Only this time it was lethal. "Then come and take it from my hand. Like a real man." She held her hand out over the churning gears of the clock. The signet ring glinted. Julian's greed overrode his caution. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the iron band. Just as his fingers reached for it, Alara didn't drop the ring. She grabbed the heavy brass pendulum swinging beside them and shoved it with every ounce of her strength. The weight caught Julian off balance. His polished shoes slipped on the oily floor. He didn't fall off the tower, not yet, but his gun skittered across the catwalk and fell through the floorboards, lost in the machinery below. "Lydia now!" Alara shouted. They didn't run for the ladder. They ran for the elevator Julian had left open. But as the doors began to hiss shut, Julian lunged, his hand catching the edge of the metal. The tension was no longer about the ledger. It was a literal struggle for the air they breathed. Julian's face, distorted with a primal, ugly hunger for power, forced its way into the gap. "Nothing," he hissed. Alara looked him in the eye. "I am a Vance. And we always keep our receipts." She slammed her heel onto his fingers. He roared, recoiling as the doors snapped shut. The elevator began its descent. But as they moved toward the ground, Alara realized the victory was short-lived. The elevator didn't go to the lobby. It flickered, the floor indicator spinning wildly, and began to drop toward the sub-basement. The Sterlings had one more secret. And it was buried deep. The elevator didn't just descend. It plummeted, the stomach-churning drop ending with a jarring metallic thud that sent Alara and Lydia to their knees. The lights flickered from a sterile white to a rhythmic, pulsing red. When the doors hissed open, they didn't reveal the polished marble of the Somerset lobby. Instead, they opened into a cold, concrete cavern, a high-tech bunker hidden beneath the foundations of the estate. The air here was different, filtered, recycled, and smelling of ozone and old paper. "The vault," Lydia whispered, her breath hitching. "My father calls it his sanctum. I've never been allowed down here." Alara stepped out, her midnight silk dress looking like a bruise against the gray concrete. At the end of the corridor stood a single massive steel door, flanked by two armed guards who looked more like mercenaries than security. But they weren't looking at Alara or Lydia. They were looking at monitors on the wall. On the screens, the merger was happening. Arthur Sterling, the patriarch, was sitting in his study, a fountain pen poised over a document that would solidify the theft of the century. "We have to stop him," Alara said, her voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Lydia, the biometric scanner." "It won't work," a voice echoed from the shadows of the corridor. Alara spun around, her heart jumping. Stepping into the red light was Silas. His tuxedo was torn and a jagged cut ran across his cheek, but he held a black tablet in his hand, his fingers dancing across the screen. "Silas." Alara breathed, a rush of relief flooding her. "How did you?" "I told you I knew the house," Silas said, though he didn't look up. "But Alara, we were wrong. All of us. We thought the Viridian ledger was proof of embezzlement. We thought it was about money." He turned the tablet toward them. On the screen was a scanned image of a document dated 30 years ago. It wasn't an accounting ledger. It was a birth certificate. Alara's eyes scanned the fine print. Her breath stopped. The name at the top wasn't hers. It was Julian's. "What is this?" Lydia asked, leaning in. "Julian isn't a Sterling," Silas said, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. "Arthur Sterling's wife, your mother Lydia, had a child before she married him. A child with Arthur Vance." Your father, Alara. The world tilted. The red light seemed to spin. Alara reached out to the cold concrete wall to steady herself. You're saying, Julian is my brother? Half-brother, Silas corrected. And that's why your father was framed. He didn't just have the technical claim to the company. He had the biological claim to the Sterling bloodline through the marriage. Arthur Sterling didn't just steal the money. He stole a son to ensure his legacy looked perfect. He killed your father not to hide a theft but to hide a kidnapping. The revelation was a game-changer. It shattered everything Alara believed about her enemy. Julian wasn't just a monster she had to defeat. He was a victim of the same man who had destroyed her life. The fortune hunter comment took on a sickening new meaning. Julian had been taught to hate Alara because her existence was the only thing that could prove he didn't belong in his own home. He doesn't know, Lydia whispered, her hands shaking. Julian has no idea. He thinks he's fighting for his birthright, but he's fighting for the man who stole him. Suddenly, the monitors on the wall hissed with static before clearing to show Julian. He had made it down. He was standing at the other end of the bunker, his face bruised, his eyes wild. He was holding a remote detonator. I know you're down here. Julian's voice boomed through the bunker's speakers. I don't care about the ledger anymore. If I can't have the Sterling legacy, no one will. I've set the suppression system to dump carbon dioxide into the sublevels. You have 5 minutes of oxygen left. The stakes had reached their absolute zenith. It wasn't just about justice or the merger anymore. It was a fight for the very air in their lungs and a fight for the soul of a man who didn't know he was his own enemy's brother. Alara looked at the steel door, then at the monitors. She could see Julian's hand trembling on the detonator. He was breaking. The pressure of being a Sterling had finally fractured his mind. We aren't leaving him, Alara said, turning to Silas. Alara, he just tried to kill us, Silas argued. He's not a Sterling, Alara screamed, the sound echoing in the concrete tomb. He's a Vance. And I don't leave my family behind. She snatched the tablet from Silas's hand and began to run toward the monitors, toward the brother she never knew she had, as the first hiss of the gas began to whistle through the vents. The hiss of the carbon dioxide was a low, predatory whistle that filled the concrete corridor. It was the sound of the world narrowing down to a single desperate point. In the red-pulsed gloom of the sub-basement, the air already felt heavy, tasting of cold metal and impending doom. Alara's lungs burned, a sharp, stabbing reminder that every second spent in shock was a second stolen from their lives. Julian. Alara's voice was a ragged plea as she reached the reinforced glass partition of the control room. On the other side, Julian stood like a ghost of himself. The refined, arrogant heir who had mocked her at the ball was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out man, his knuckles white as he gripped the detonator. He looked at Alara through the glass, his eyes vacant, reflecting the flickering red emergency lights. Go away, Alara, he whispered, his voice piped through the intercom, sounding thin and tinny. I've spent my whole life trying to be the man my father wanted. I've lied, I've cheated, I've buried his secrets. And for what? To be mocked by a girl who has nothing. You don't have to be him, Julian. Alara slammed her palm against the glass. You were never him. But the separation was more than just glass. It was 30 years of indoctrination. Julian shook his head, a single tear carving a path through the grime on his face. You don't understand. If I don't sign these merger documents, if I don't prove I'm a Sterling, I'm nothing. I'm just a failure in a borrowed suit. Behind Alara, Lydia slumped against the wall, her breathing becoming shallow. Silas was frantically trying to override the ventilation system on his tablet, but his fingers were beginning to lose their coordination. The oxygen levels were dropping below the threshold of consciousness. The gas. It's working too fast, Silas gasped, his voice a rasping shadow. Alara, we have to get out. The emergency hatch? No. Alara turned back to Julian, her vision beginning to blur at the edges. This was the moment where everything seemed insurmountable. She was losing her only ally, her newfound sister was slipping away, and the man she was supposed to save was the one holding the noose. The weight of the silence in the bunker was suffocating. Alara felt a wave of despair wash over her, a cold, paralyzing certainty that she had led everyone she loved into a tomb. Her father had died for this truth, and now she would die for it too, while the real villain, Arthur Sterling, sat upstairs in a warm study, signing away their lives. Julian, look at the screen. Ilara screamed, holding the tablet up to the glass with trembling hands. Look at the certificate. Look at the dates. Julian didn't move. He looked at the detonator, his thumb hovering over the red button. It's too late for stories, Ilara. It's not a story. It's your life. The darkness was closing in. Ilara's knees buckled and she slid down the glass, her forehead resting against the cold surface. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and heavy, like the tolling of a funeral bell. She thought of her mother, waiting in that quiet room, waiting for a husband who would never come home and a daughter who was currently exhaling her last breath in a Sterling bunker. The situation was hopeless. The Sterlings had won. They had turned brother against sister, daughter against father, and truth into a death sentence. Through the haze of her fading consciousness, Ilara felt a rhythmic thumping. It wasn't her heart. It was Julian. He was pounding on the glass from the other side, his face pressed against it, his eyes finally fixed on the tablet she had dropped. He was reading. His mouth moved silently, tracing the names. Arthur Vance. Lena Sterling. No, Julian mouthed, the word a silent explosion. No, no, no. He looked from the document to Ilara's slumped form. For the first time he didn't see a fortune hunter. He saw a mirror. He saw the same eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw. He saw the sister he had been robbed of. But as he reached for the vent override, the control panel sparked. The system had been damaged in the earlier struggle. The red lights turned to a solid, mocking crimson. The bunker was sealed. The air was gone. And Julian was trapped in a room with the power to save her, but no way to use it. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of Julian's realization. Inside the glass-walled control booth, Julian Sterling, or rather Julian Vance, stared at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The detonator sat on the console, a plastic symbol of the destruction he had been groomed to deliver. He looked at Ilara, whose head had lolled against the glass. Her skin was turning a ghostly, oxygen-deprived pale. Beside her, Silas had collapsed and Lydia was barely a heap of silk on the floor. The turning point didn't come from a mechanical override or a sudden rescue. It came from a surge of dormant blood. Julian grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall of the booth. He didn't use it to spray the vents. He swung it like a sledgehammer against the reinforced glass. Frick! The sound echoed through the bunker like a gunshot. He swung again. And again. On the fourth strike the glass spiderwebbed. On the fifth, it shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds that rained down on Ilara's still form. Fresh air, the pressurized filtered air from the control booth, rushed out into the corridor. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. Julian scrambled through the jagged opening, cutting his palms on the shards, and fell to his knees beside Ilara. He didn't shake her. He pressed his fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint, erratic, but there. Wake up, Julian hissed, his voice cracking with a vulnerability he hadn't felt since he was a child. Ilara, wake up. You didn't come this far to die in a basement. Wake up, sister. Ilara's eyes flickered. She took a ragged, gasping breath, the oxygen hitting her lungs like fire. She looked up, her vision clearing to see the man who had been her tormentor now cradling her head. Julian, she whispered. I saw it, he said, his voice thick with tears. The certificate. The dates. Everything he told me. It was a lie. He didn't save me from a broken home. He stole me from a good man. Ilara reached up, her trembling fingers brushing the blood on his cheek. He didn't just steal you, Julian. He tried to turn you into him. But he failed. Silas groaned, pushing himself up, and Lydia began to cough, her color returning. The immediate threat of the gas had been neutralized by the shattered glass, but the clock was still ticking. On the monitors above, Arthur Sterling was standing up, shaking hands with the representative of the Heritage Fund. The merger was complete. The theft was being legalized in real time. It's over, Lydia whispered, looking at the screen. He signed it. No, Julian said, standing up and pulling Ilara to her feet. He looked toward the massive steel vault door at the end of the hall. He signed the merger for the Sterling assets. But he doesn't have the Viridian ledger. And he doesn't have the key. He looked at Ilara's signet ring. The ring isn't just a symbol, is it? Ilara looked at the iron band. She realized now why her father had been so insistent. She walked toward the vault door. It wasn't a biometric scanner they needed. It wasn't a code. At the center of the steel door was a small, circular indentation, hidden behind a sliding plate that looked like a decorative crest. It was the exact shape and size of the signet ring's face. He could never open it, Elara realized, her voice gaining strength. Arthur Sterling built his house on top of this vault, but he could never get inside. He's been waiting 30 years for this ring to come back to him. Then let's give it to him, Julian said, stepping up beside her. But not the way he expects. Elara pressed the ring into the indentation. There was a mechanical click, not the digital beep of modern security, but the heavy, soulful grind of old-fashioned tumblers. The vault door, 6 inches of solid steel, began to swing inward. Inside was not gold nor stacks of cash. It was a room filled with the life Arthur Sterling had tried to bury. Dozens of filing cabinets, a workbench, and in the center a single leather-bound book, the Viridian Ledger. But beside the ledger sat a laptop, its screen glowing. It was connected to the estate's main server. He's using the merger to move the money now, Silas said, stumbling into the room and heading straight for the computer. But if I can link the ledger's physical records to these digital transfers in the next 5 minutes, I can trigger an automatic freeze from the International Banking Commission. Do it, Elara said. Julian turned toward the elevator. I'll hold the door. My father will be coming down the moment he realizes the vault has been breached. He has a remote sensor. Elara grabbed Julian's arm. Julian, you don't have to face him alone. Julian looked at the elevator, then back at the sister he had just found. For 30 years I was his shadow. Tonight I'm the light that shows the world exactly what he is. Go. Help Silas. I've got the door. The turning point was complete. The hunted had become the hunters, and the fortune hunter was about to prove that some things are worth more than any fortune. The sub-basement air, once a tomb of carbon dioxide, was now charged with the frantic energy of a collapsing empire. Silas's fingers flew across the laptop keys, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his sweat-beaded brow. Behind him, the Viridian Ledger lay open, a roadmap of greed that stretched back 3 decades. I've got the link. Silas shouted over the roar of the building's secondary generators. The ledger's serial numbers match the ghost accounts the Heritage Fund is trying to absorb. It's a perfect match, Elara. But I need a final authorization from a Sterling terminal to execute the freeze. It has to come from the master study upstairs. Then we're going up, Elara said, her voice a low, lethal calm. The elevator chimed, not the frantic warning of the descent, but the steady, arrogant tone of the master returning to his domain. The doors slid open to reveal Arthur Sterling. He didn't look like a villain from a story, he looked like a statesman. His hair was a perfect silver, his suit tailored to hide the rot beneath. But when he saw the vault door standing wide, his composure shattered like cheap glass. You, Arthur hissed, his gaze darting from Elara to the signet ring on her finger and then to Julian. Julian, get away from her. She's poisoned your mind with whatever lies she brought from the gutter. Julian stepped forward, his silhouette tall and imposing against the light of the vault. The only lies I've been breathing, father, if I can even call you that, are the ones you've been feeding me since I was old enough to speak. I saw the certificate. I know whose blood is in my veins. Arthur's face contorted, the mask of the billionaire sliding away to reveal the predator beneath. Blood? You think blood matters? I gave you a name. I gave you a kingdom. You were a crying brat in a drafty house and I made you a prince. You made me a hostage, Julian countered, his voice steady. And tonight the ransom is being paid in full. Arthur reached into his jacket, but he wasn't reaching for a gun. He pulled out a small encrypted remote. The merger is signed. The money is moving. In 60 seconds, the Somerset estate and everything in this vault will be legally transferred to a shell corporation in the Caymans. You'll be standing in a room that doesn't exist, holding a book that means nothing. Not if we freeze the accounts first, Elara said, stepping out from behind Julian. She held up the tablet Silas had been using. Silas has already bypassed your firewall, Arthur. We don't need your permission. We just need your presence. What are you talking about? Arthur sneered. The Somerset estate uses a 3-factor authentication for high-value transfers, Elara explained, her smile returning, the same unreadable, devastating smile from the ballroom. Biometrics, a physical key and a voice print. You just gave us the voice print when you admitted to the theft. Silas, did you get it? From the shadows of the vault, Silas held up a thumb. You didn't come this far to die in a basement. Wake up, sister. Alara's eyes flickered. She took a ragged, gasping breath, the oxygen hitting her lungs like fire. She looked up, her vision clearing to see the man who had been her tormentor now cradling her head. Julian, she whispered. I saw it, he said, his voice thick with tears. The certificate. The dates. Everything he told me. It was a lie. He didn't save me from a broken home. He stole me from a good man. Alara reached up, her trembling fingers brushing the blood on his cheek. He didn't just steal you, Julian. He tried to turn you into him. But he failed. Silas groaned, pushing himself up, and Lydia began to cough, her color returning. The immediate threat of the gas had been neutralized by the shattered glass, but the clock was still ticking. On the monitors above, Arthur Sterling was standing up, shaking hands with the representative of the Heritage Fund. The merger was complete. The theft was being legalized in real time. It's over, Lydia whispered, looking at the screen. He signed it. No, Julian said, standing up and pulling Alara to her feet. He looked toward the massive steel vault door at the end of the hall. He signed the merger for the Sterling assets. But he doesn't have the Viridian ledger. And he doesn't have the key. He looked at Alara's signet ring. The ring isn't just a symbol, is it? Alara looked at the iron band. She realized now why her father had been so insistent. She walked toward the vault door. It wasn't a biometric scanner they needed. It wasn't a code. At the center of the steel door was a small, circular indentation, hidden behind a sliding plate that looked like a decorative crest. It was the exact shape and size of the signet ring's face. He could never open it, Alara realized, her voice gaining strength. Arthur Sterling built his house on top of this vault, but he could never get inside. He's been waiting 30 years for this ring to come back to him. Then let's give it to him, Julian said, stepping up beside her. But not the way he expects. Alara pressed the ring into the indentation. There was a mechanical click, not the digital beep of modern security, but the heavy, soulful grind of old-fashioned tumblers. The vault door, 6 inches of solid steel, began to swing inward. Inside was not gold nor stacks of cash. It was a room filled with the life Arthur Sterling had tried to bury. Dozens of filing cabinets, a workbench, and in the center a single leather-bound book, the Viridian ledger. But beside the ledger sat a laptop, its screen glowing. It was connected to the estate's main server. He's using the merger to move the money now, Silas said, stumbling into the room and heading straight for the computer. But if I can link the ledger's physical records to these digital transfers in the next 5 minutes, I can trigger an automatic freeze from the International Banking Commission. Do it, Alara said. Julian turned toward the elevator. I'll hold the door. My father will be coming down the moment he realizes the vault has been breached. He has a remote sensor. Alara grabbed Julian's arm. Julian, you don't have to face him alone. Julian looked at the elevator, then back at the sister he had just found. For 30 years I was his shadow. Tonight I'm the light that shows the world exactly what he is. Go. Help Silas. I've got the door. The turning point was complete. The hunted had become the hunters, and the fortune hunter was about to prove that some things are worth more than any fortune. The sub-basement air, once a tomb of carbon dioxide, was now charged with the frantic energy of a collapsing empire. Silas's fingers flew across the laptop keys, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his sweat-beaded brow. Behind him, the Viridian ledger lay open, a roadmap of greed that stretched back 3 decades. I've got the link. Silas shouted over the roar of the building's secondary generators. The ledger's serial numbers match the ghost accounts the Heritage Fund is trying to absorb. It's a perfect match, Alara. But I need a final authorization from a Sterling terminal to execute the freeze. It has to come from the master study upstairs. Then we're going up, Alara said, her voice a low, lethal calm. The elevator chimed, not the frantic warning of the descent, but the steady, arrogant tone of the master returning to his domain. The doors slid open to reveal Arthur Sterling. He didn't look like a villain from a story. He looked like a statesman. His hair was a perfect silver, his suit tailored to hide the rot beneath. But when he saw the vault door standing wide, his composure shattered like cheap glass. You, Arthur hissed, his gaze darting from Elara to the signet ring on her finger and then to Julian. Julian, get away from her. She's poisoned your mind with whatever lies she brought from the gutter. Julian stepped forward, his silhouette tall and imposing against the light of the vault. The only lies I've been breathing, Father, if I can even call you that, are the ones you've been feeding me since I was old enough to speak. I saw the certificate. I know whose blood is in my veins. Arthur's face contorted, the mask of the billionaire sliding away to reveal the predator beneath. Blood? You think blood matters? I gave you a name. I gave you a kingdom. You were a crying brat in a drafty house and I made you a prince. You made me a hostage, Julian countered, his voice steady. And tonight the ransom is being paid in full. Arthur reached into his jacket, but he wasn't reaching for a gun. He pulled out a small encrypted remote. The merger is signed. The money is moving. In 60 seconds, the Somerset estate and everything in this vault will be legally transferred to a shell corporation in the Caymans. You'll be standing in a room that doesn't exist, holding a book that means nothing. Not if we freeze the accounts first, Elara said, stepping out from behind Julian. She held up the tablet Silas had been using. Silas has already bypassed your firewall, Arthur. We don't need your permission. We just need your presence. What are you talking about? Arthur sneered. The Somerset estate uses a 3-factor authentication for high-value transfers, Elara explained, her smile returning, the same unreadable, devastating smile from the ballroom. Biometrics, a physical key and a voice print. You just gave us the voice print when you admitted to the theft. Silas, did you get it? From the shadows of the vault, Silas held up a thumb.